Hi, my name is Teddy Sforonos. I'm a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, and this is our online version of the course, The Science and Implications of Generative AI. This course, which I'm teaching alongside Chared Goyal and Dan Levy, is an attempt to bring together both the science of how generative AI works and also the thinking through of the policy implications of generative AI as well. The course is going to be split into 3 different units. The first will be really the building blocks of how generative AI works from a sort of layperson's perspective. The second will be how you could potentially use it effectively in your work and in your individual lives. And the third unit will be about how we should think about this from a societal level, how it'll affect the people and the issues that you care the most about in your work and your life. So it's worth taking a step back and thinking about the debut of mass market large language models, LLMs. So in November 30th, 2022, ChatGPT was made available to the world, and this was sort of the first time that an LLM was very widely available to people who were not themselves interested in or focusing on generative AI. And it was really quite a splash. So just a couple days later, Greg Brockman tweeted that ChatGPT just crossed 1 million users 5 days after launch. And the CEO of Box, Aaron Levy, said that ChatGPT is one of those rare moments in technology where you see a glimmer of how everything is going to be different going forward. And I think a lot of people had very similar experiences when they first encountered ChatGPT, thinking about how this model seems to work, how human it seems to be. And so it's worth thinking about what is unique, what is new about generative AI that made it very different from other ways of thinking about AI. So here at the Kennedy School, our course ended up having quite a few people who were interested in taking the course. They had to bid a certain number of points to get it, and that just shows just how popular the idea of generative AI is and learning about it is in our school. When asking our students what types of ways they've used generative AI, they said a number of things. Many use it for creative and artistic uses. I think many of us made things like poems and song lyrics at first when ChatGPT came out. Many use it for academic and research assistance in terms of brainstorming potential projects and essays and things along those lines. A lot of people are using it in coding and data visualization to help troubleshoot code and try to understand better why their code may or may not be working. And then finally, generating actual content, drafting documents such as invitations and plans and applications is also a really significant use of it. So it's worth thinking about how is this type of AI, generative AI, different from traditional uses of AI that we've talked about up until this point. So traditional AI, which you can think of as discriminative AI, tends to have the following structure. There tends to be some set of data, then that data is fed into a model that has been trained effectively, and then that model usually is used for what we call prediction or classification, essentially trying to assess whether something is one thing or another thing. So in a policy context, there are a couple of examples you can think about, whether building inspectors should prioritize a particular building given its elevated fire risk, if tax auditors should prioritize people with a high likelihood of underpayment, if hospitals should provide transportation for patients at high risk of not appearing at their appointments. These models can help us categorize these sorts of units to decide whether or not we should act on a particular subset of them. Now that differs from generative AI, where instead of just us giving it a data set and it giving us some set of potential classifications, when we can actually interact with it. We can ask it questions and it can answer it. We can ask it for things like art and images and it can create art and images. These things feel uniquely new to generative AI, though as my colleague Chared will talk about later, there's actually quite a few similarities between these two different types of AI. But the thing that seems to make it unique is something that is, I think, really true and human to a lot of us, which is essentially that these models seem to approximate a lot of things about human behavior. It feels like they can produce content like essays and artwork that we often can't distinguish from what humans can do. And a Goldman Sachs report sort of summarized this in 3 key features that make generative AI unique as compared to traditional AI. The first is that the use cases seem general as opposed to specific. We're not just trying to categorize individual things into particular categories. We can actually ask it whatever we want and we can get some pretty good responses to it. The content is generative rather than simply describing existing information. It can make new things for us. And this third thing, which I think is quite important for things like ChatGPT, is that the interfaces are approachable. People without technical backgrounds can go and simply talk in English, not in Python or anything like that, to these models and get really useful information back to them. So then the question becomes, how can we most effectively use these tools? And that's what we're going to start talking about next.